Hey y'all. So with TikTok going away, I wanted to do two videos before we left. The first one is for actors. I want everybody to read Blake Lively's lawsuit, and then I want you to read Justin Baldoni's lawsuit. It is very important. As someone who has survived a shit ton of trauma, working on intimate scenes can be really triggering. And I have worked on them in theater before we had intimacy coordinators. And I've also worked on intimate scenes on television with an intimacy coordinator. Now, what I will say is that if you are already feeling unsafe with an actor, why would you not want the intimacy coordinator? Why would you not sign your nudity rider? For example, when I was on Diara from Detroit, I had very specific things in my nudity rider about what I would and wouldn't show. And that was for my protection. So, especially as somebody who has been in the industry for so long, I'm just wondering if you didn't feel safe, why you didn't use the multiple tools around you to ensure your safety if what happened happened. You know, I wasn't there, but as a fellow actress, I that was something that I saw and I was like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. Something seems fishy about the accusation. And what's frustrating is it then makes it harder when people come forward. So that is my first thought. My second thought is I actually watched the movie. I wasn't going to, but I was just so sick of hearing about it. I was like, let me see what all the fuss is about. And what I will say is this is based on my experience, okay? I have kissed men on stage in projects that I was really attracted to. And I've also had to kiss men that I couldn't stand. And there's a difference. There's a difference. There's a difference in the energy. There's a difference in who pulls away first. There's a difference, when you kiss somebody and the other person pulls away, but you're still in it because you like that person and you're still kind of leaning forward. I'm just going to say, I saw a lot of that in the film. So do with that what you will. So, something else I wanted to talk about was bullying from actresses. And this is not a white specific thing, though I have been bullied by many a white woman in theater. Absolutely. And, I always say that people that go into the industry as actors, we're all trying to heal some trauma. Because why else, when we put ourselves through the audition process over and over and over again, right? Like it's really a terrible way to live. I'm just going to be honest. It really is. Like it's hard. You are always in this state of anxiety. But when you do get the job, it's just so exciting, and you feel like, yes, this is why I'm here. Now, listen, if you came on the scene and you popped off and you've just been working nonstop, this is not for you. And I say good luck and God bless. But for the majority of us, it's ups and downs and ups and downs. So I wanted to say to my fellow actors, because I also know I have some students on this app, part of why I wanted to come into the industry was not just to be heard and accepted, because I think that's a common theme, especially when you're in musical theater, because we're like, not only do I want to act, I'm going to show you that I can do all three things. Like, we're a special breed. We're a special breed. Okay. And I was bullied all throughout school. I was. I was one of the first kids in the gifted program in my school, and I'm Black in a white area. And it wasn't just from the kids, some of the parents were nightmares. And I remember in high school, I started hiding it well. And I became the person that was like, you know what? If you don't have friends, I'm going to be your friend, because I was giving what I wanted to get. I know what it's like to have no friends. I know what it's like to not have anyone to sit with. So that's how I grew my crew in junior high and high school. And I was like president of anything, everything. I was captain of cheerleading, but I wasn't a mean captain. I was a nice captain. I was like, let's switch it up. Let's change the narrative, right? And I remember there was this girl, a fellow Black girl. She was 2 grades below me, and she had terrible acne. And I remember I was in this phase of I just didn't want to get relaxers anymore. I hated how flat it was making my hair. So I went back to having my mom hot comb it. So of course, my hair was not laid. It was 1996 to 1997. It was not laid, and none of this was popular yet. And I remember this girl, every time she would see me, she would be walking with her one friend, and she would always say something about how I needed a relaxer, or she would make some snarky comment. And I remember I would just look at her and be like, but have you seen your face? And I would never say it out loud because I realized that her projection had nothing to do with me, but it still hurt. It still hurt a lot. And, of course, if I could go back today, I would actually say, girl, if you don't get out of here with your acne scarred face and leave me alone, because I am not doing anything but being nice to you. So if you don't have anything nice to say to me, save your breath, please. But we can't go back in time. Anyway, I digress. So when I moved to New York and 9/11 had happened, and I didn't realize I had all of this unhealed trauma. So, if you are a Black person, especially if you grew up in the suburbs, you are taught to assimilate. You are taught to not make waves. And I didn't make waves in my hometown really until I got to like high school. I didn't make waves in college until like my junior and senior year. So the same happened with New York. And when I entered the Broadway community, I remember there was like a lot of, not everybody was friendly because I didn't go to a conservatory, and everyone was kind of like, how did you get here from an open call? And it took me a while to gain my footing. I was also in an abusive marriage. And I remember there was one girl, and I actually finally had it out with her. And now she's one of my best friends. So that was one of the few times I actually let myself pop off. And I actually wish I would have done it more often, because here's a story that I wanted to tell. Um, I was doing an off Broadway musical. I was starring in it. It was my first starring role off Broadway. I was really excited. It's a musical called Storyville, and it had been in development for years. And one of the noticeable things about the women of Storyville were that they were all very fair skinned, right? The the women who were ladies of the night uh, were very, very light skinned. I was not playing one of the ladies of the night. I was playing a jazz singer. And the director had told us, read this specific book before we get started because I want you to get a feel for the culture. You know, before I ever accept any role, I always do research to see, is this a place where I can actually fit? Or are we suspending reality when it comes to race and complexion? I did that before I accepted Lois Lane. I did that in Lightning Thief because we were suspending reality about all of that. I mean, it's a musical about Greek gods. Of course, Sally can be Black. Um, so I remember there was this day that one of the cast members, who I'm not going to name, brought a friend who couldn't, I can't remember if it was a friend or a family member who couldn't come see the show. And I don't know why this was allowed because it's completely unprofessional, because this was not the finished product. And I do feel like all of the actors should have been able to take a vote as to whether or not we would agree to let in somebody who was not a part of the rehearsal process. But I digress. So apparently, after this gentleman, who was my complexion, if I remember correctly, he was very disturbed that I was dark skinned, and he couldn't understand why I had the leading role. Mind you, the woman who played the lead role that I was playing, Tigray, was a little bit darker than me, Ernestine Jackson, and she was in the cast. Okay. So from jump, we have the original, who was Ernestine, and me, both dark skinned women. And she worked with the playwright, with the woman who wrote the piece, and she was cast in the role. So imagine my surprise when a meeting is called after one of the rehearsals to talk about things, because I was feeling some funky energy. and all of the women had to share the same dressing room, which that's a whole other issue. And I remember sitting there and being shocked as this girl who was playing one of the supporting roles basically says that I don't deserve to have my part because I'm dark skinned. And she starts going on and on and on and on. And I just froze because I was like, how is this happening? And furthermore, I was very disappointed that the director, who I love, did not protect me. He did not take control of the room. He did not say, hey, I made my decision. This is not up for debate. No, he let it play out because he was afraid it was one of those black things and that he, as a white man, should not get involved. So I sat and listened to these people who shared a dressing room with me, fellow black women, were tearing me down because of the color of my skin. Not only was it heartbreaking, but there were people I looked up to in that meeting that did not stand up for me. And at the time, I did not see that it was obviously haterade because she wanted my role. But for her to turn it into a racial thing and for her to have not done the work, my big thing was if you would have read the book that we were supposed to read, it explained that it was strictly only the women of the night that were light skinned. Jazz singers, which is what I was in the show, were black. You could be dark skinned, you could be light skinned. You just needed to be black to sing in this area. But she didn't read the book. And because she didn't do her research, she threw a hissy fit. And that is not something that is unusual, unfortunately. What I realized in that moment is that just because a person is Broadway famous does not mean that they have done the healing work to be a leader. And also, not everybody is called to be a leader. And I do think that in this industry, a lot of people just want people that they can push around. A lot of people don't want leaders in their cast. They want the leaders to be on the creative team. They don't want the actors to be leaders. And this isn't everybody. I'm saying that for a lot of teams, you get this reputation for, she might be a problem. And I used to hide my leadership abilities because I wanted to work. I didn't want to be a problem. But the thing is, my energy says I am a leader from the minute I walk in. Even if I don't feel like one, I am one. And when I am not walking in my purpose, when I am not aligned with the energy that is within me, I don't audition well. I don't perform well. So I wish I would have realized that sooner. I wish I would have realized that, no, girl, she's just jealous. I wish I would have gathered my stuff and left because the same girl did not know her lines until we were well into previews. And that's what I was confused by. Like, why are we sitting here debating something when she's not on the creative team and she doesn't even know her lines? And she's got this crazy accent for a musical taking place in New Orleans. My dad is from Louisiana. I have cousins in New Orleans, and she's got this crazy accent that apparently nobody's going to rein in. So, yes, in hindsight, I wish I would have gathered my things and said, hey, I have lines to learn. This is not a required meeting, so I'm leaving. I had those experiences a lot. And I will say in the entertainment industry, sometimes there are people who are just going to test you to see if they can break you so that they can assert dominance over you. And if you are somebody who comes in strong, but you don't realize that you are a strong leader, you will experience some of the things that I've experienced. Also, and all of this Blake Lively stuff definitely brought up things that I've also experienced. Like, I remember being in a show where there was a relationship between one of the actors and the director, and this actor felt like because of that, he could give notes, he could give adjustments, he could whisper in her ear at night about things that should happen. And it was like it fucked up the balance. And this is not a secret. Like, I made it very clear in that experience because I was like, this is kind of fucked up because you're not the director. Don't you give me notes? Yes, of course, as I started to get older, I started realizing what was happening. I started standing up for myself more. And the thing is, there's a lot of fear. And I think because I'm back in academia, I'm very sensitive to the fear of doing the right thing, not wanting to piss anybody off when you go to New York. Stand up for yourself, but don't be an asshole. You absolutely have the right to defend yourself. You absolutely have the right to call out disrespect. Just don't be an asshole. You'll be fine. What might happen though is that the people who don't wish you well, the people who do want to manipulate and control, they're not going to hire you. But when I look at my career, I see so many moments where I'm like, I probably could have been Broadway famous by now. But thinking of the auditions I turned down, because once I work with somebody who's toxic, I'm like, I'm not working with them again. That girl I talked about, I will never work with her again. If I see her name on a breakdown, I'm like, pass. And we have the right to do that. We do not have to be so desperate that we give up our integrity. And that's also not to say that people who are Broadway famous or even Hollywood famous have given up their integrity. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is if you are someone like me who does have leadership tendencies and you feel like you're biting your tongue so much because you want to keep your job, start to ask yourself, well, why would I put myself through this? Why am I hurting myself to be accepted and liked by people who are running toxic shows? Like all of the shows that I wanted to be in the most, I found out later that backstage was a nightmare and I realized, oh, I was protected. The thing I wanted the most, I was actually protected from. So, I'm actually grateful. And then, when I'm thinking about my experience with pitching my show, I've seen other solo shows that talk about identity. There's one going on right now that I'm really excited to eventually see. And the themes are very similar. The only difference is I'm speaking from a Black American perspective, a Black American woman perspective, the descendants of people who were enslaved on American soil. And I have just started to accept the fact that a lot of artistic directors have not done the healing work to be able to see that my story has as much value as anybody else, that my story, the story of suburban Black girls, has value. It has just as much value as shows about white men having a midlife crisis. It has just as much value as stories about Black people that got out of the hood. It has just as much value as civil rights musicals and musicals where Black people are enslaved. But I also realized that not every artistic director has done the healing to hear my words and to not take offense to them. I mean, the way that I've been gaslit, it's fascinating because, I don't have an agent for playwriting. And one would think that by getting into the Ojai Playwrights Conference, my first time applying, you would think that you could get an agent after that. You would also think that by going through the La Jolla Playhouse DNA series, that you would get an agent. And not only is it hard for me to get people to read my script, even when I have people who are represented by these agents, I've been gaslit by the white women who are reading them, by the same women who say that they are a space for all women's stories. I'm not getting constructive feedback because I can take a note. I can take a note. But when you say, like, oh, I just didn't understand the story, or it didn't really go anywhere, or it didn't have an arc, or what was my favorite one? Oh, we don't do shows like that. But on your website, it says that you tell diverse stories. You say that you're a champion for women. So, yeah, it's been disappointing. I might have some news soon. I have been encouraged that there are white women who are in charge of theater companies that are actually open to my show. And I'm very grateful. Um, But this journey has been incredibly difficult and telling. So all of that to say, I mean that was a lot. I will also say I'm so glad I did not pop off in LA. I'm glad I didn't even move to LA until I was good and grown because now I have boundaries. And the experiences I had in New York, I don't have out here because people already know. People know from the way I present myself now. I'm not one to be fucked with. I'm not. If that means that I don't work as often as other actresses on camera or on stage, I'm perfectly fine with that. Because what I want to tell all of my students, past and present, your integrity is worth more than any booking. And as long as you can look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day with the choices you make, with the way you allow people to treat you, fantastic. I want you to understand that your integrity should not be for sale because it's really hard to get back. It's really hard to get back when you realize that your integrity was worth nothing to the people in charge. Because again, this is a business and this is a very unfair business. So you might make these huge sacrifices and put yourself through hell for a producer who would replace you in a second. So I'm going to keep doing me. I'm going to keep finding my way and I'm going to keep speaking out because I've realized like I really am somebody who is going to just hold up a mirror and ask, "Why are you being like this?" I really want to understand. You see, they're reading my words through their unhealed lens. And I'd rather not produce my play in a space where the person at the top is unhealed and unwilling to think they have a blind spot. And that's the tricky thing with theater. We like to think that theater is our safe space. It is not. It's not. And that's not just a race thing, that's a gender thing. That is within the Black Broadway community. Like it's dog eat dog. It really is. So I want you to see this business as a business. You're not there to make friends. If you make friends, that's a bonus. That's icing on the cake. You're there to work. And the people that vibe with you will vibe with you. But a lot of times, that job that you really wanted is the one that will break you. So I want you to remember that the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni thing, that happens in theater too. It happens in theater too. And you get to set your boundaries. Everyone has a different set of things that they will put up with and that they won't put up with. And, you know, a lot of people ask me, like, oh, are you ever going to do theater again? I mean, yeah, I auditioned for it. I'm definitely going to do my show somewhere. But when I go back to do a Broadway show, I'm going to have a very different experience. It's going to have to be with a creative team that is not intimidated by my strength. Period, point blank. I remember when I first started speaking up in Mermaid, I was told by one of the producers, like, aren't you over that yet? And I remembered looking at him like, huh, like you take me speaking out over something that was highly offensive and hurtful, and you just want me to just get over it. Cool, 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 cool. And again, listen, I have friends who have had a very different experience on Broadway. They are principals that are working and they are delightfully happy. That just wasn't my experience. I absolutely had moments of joy. I also had a lot of moments of pain. And I want you to remember that keeping receipts might save your job. I take I take my contracts on every job. If I'm ever asked to do something that feels not okay, I always say like, "Hey, let me talk to my agent about that." It's okay to say that. It's okay to say, "Hey, this doesn't feel safe." When Adrian Bailey fell in The Little Mermaid, part of what frustrated me the most was the culture of fear against speaking out on something that made you feel unsafe. I am happy to be the squeaky wheel because once you have experienced that, it changes you. Also, once you write out your will and talk about where you want your body to be sent if you happen to die during surgery, that changes you. So I really don't have fear about my speaking out potentially keeping me from jobs. Life is too short. And a lot of studies show that holding in emotion when you're in toxic environments leads to all of these diseases that women deal with, endometriosis, fibroids, different kinds of cancer. So I'm not risking my health anymore. Okay. Yes, there is that culture of fear, like, oh my God, no one's ever going to want to work with her again. Then if you're going to be the types of people that won't want to work with somebody because they're willing to stand up for themselves, then I don't want to work with you. Like, that's the thing. I think that's what people forget. Like, you get the choice. If you want to be in a toxic environment and suffer just to get that credit, have at it. I mean, I think that's part of being young where you have to learn by doing, right? Don't just take my word for it. Just pay attention to how you feel when you're at work. Pay attention to how you feel when you're in the audition room. How does the creative team make you feel? What is their energy like? Is that somebody that you think you could be around all the time? Because you also get a say in this. So, yeah, I used to get frustrated that I didn't just immediately pop off, but I'm so glad I didn't because there's a lot of work that I've been able to do in the meantime so that every time I show up on set, every time I show up for a booking, I have more healing, which means I can come in with even more joy, even more gratitude, and even more professionalism because whatever is going on that has nothing to do with my lines or my blocking, I don't have to pay attention to. I don't have to let it affect me. I can tune it out because I know they're not coming to me with that mess. And I still work. And I want to say this before I log off for the day. I remember back when I was working on Broadway, I remembered someone telling me, actually, I remembered a few people telling me, like, oh, Tanya Pinkins, she's a lot. And I started following her on Instagram. And I was like, you know what? I haven't worked with this woman, but what I have seen is that she is about the truth and she is not about the bullshit. And she works consistently and the work is good. And she still uses her platform to fight for the causes she believes in and she calls shit out. And I was like, oh, they don't like her because she tells the truth. And they're trying to keep me, somebody who's new on Broadway, from speaking out. And that's how the cycle of toxic environments continues because we we silence the truth tellers, but the talent always shows up. So yeah, I'm not worried about if I will work again after this video. I know I will. I'm too good of an actress not to work again. My career is definitely not how I expected it, but it's so much better than I ever imagined. So be true to yourself. I realize that, yes, I get cast playing a lot of very strong women. And even though I didn't feel like a strong woman inside, I finally looked at my resume and I was like, oh, when I'm in alignment with my powerful self, that's when I book the most. So why don't I just stay in that energy all the time? Because it's clearly who I was created to be. So that was a lot, but I am a lot. And I'm not mad at it. And for the right people, it will not be a lot.